Hello and welcome to the Parent Zone Perspectives on Therapy podcast, where we dive into the heartfelt journeys of parents navigating therapy with their children. This podcast is a safe space for sharing real life experiences, insights, and the unique challenges that come with supporting a child's growth. Whether you're a parent, therapist, or simply interested in understanding the therapy journey, each episode provides honest perspectives to inform, inspire, and connect us all. Join us as we explore the many pathways of parenting through therapy, one story at a time. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded. I recognise their enduring connection to land, sea, and community, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples listening today and honour their ongoing contributions to our shared culture and knowledge. I'm very excited and very happy to welcome Keryn to our podcast. And Keryn is a friend of mine. We've known each other for a few years, and I'm really excited to welcome her here. So, Keryn, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to talk to me today.
Thank you
Would
for
you
inviting me.
would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. So I am a mother of two boys. My husband and I, Adrian, got married in 2010. We have traveled the world a fair bit. We had Harry in 2014, so he's our eldest. And then 2016, we had George. My boys are wild. They're very energetic. They're very loud, very not still. And so with that has come some steep learning curves, I think. Adrian is, don't really know what Adrian does. He works with gas turbine engines. And so for a lot of the boys' formative years, he wasn't home, he was away. So a lot of it was left up to me.
Mhm.
But that shifted just before COVID. And then with COVID, he was home and he now works from home. So that's
Oh,
very different to
a
what we
big,
used to do.
yeah, big
Um,
shift.
but yeah, the boys very different, and yet very similar.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
And tell me a bit about you and what you do for
Oh,
work.
so I'm a teacher. I started at mainstream teaching. So I started my profession before I met Adrian. I was a year two teacher at
Mhm.
Iona, and then we went to London and I taught in London for a couple of years, and then I came back and I taught at Mater Christi year five for 2.5, 3 years,
Mhm.
and then had Harry, and so I got really it was a privilege to stay home with the boys. So I got to stay home for 7 years with them,
Wow.
and then that was really really lucky that I got to do that. So Adrian was
Mhm.
away for a fair chunk of it, but that then allowed me to be home with them, which was
Yeah,
looking back on it really special.
absolutely.
Um, and then I started doing a bit more relief teaching, and I just did a resume drop around my house because I didn't want to travel too far with the boys being at school and just no thank you.
Sure.
Um, and I ended up doing quite a bit of relief at Eastwick Park Ed Support Centre.
Mhm.
And that's how I started on my ed support journey, which
Right.
when I was mainstream teaching, it was never, no, thank you. I wasn't going to do that.
Mhm.
And then I think having Harry and the challenges he's had and doing so much personal research into why are we having meltdowns, how are we parenting you, what do you actually need from us, what do you need from the school, what do you need, kind of led me into this space that when I did enter ed support, I was like, oh, actually, I've got this because I already do this.
Mm.
And so then I got a contract at Eastwick Park, did that for 2 years, I think. And
Okay.
now I'm at Cloverdale Ed
Okay.
Support. So
Mm.
it's having the boys with their different needs has also then changed the way I approach teaching.
Right.
I don't think I could ever go back to mainstream because it's just, I'm going to say it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
But then I teach ed support, which is a lot. So, but I really enjoy the ed
It's
support.
too
I really
much
enjoy.
of different things, I suppose.
I think so. I think also I taught mainstream pre-children. And so,
Mm.
like, you thought you were tired, and then you had kids, and you were like, oh, you're not tired. And so I remember that and thinking, I couldn't do this and have children.
Yeah.
But then I suppose when I was mainstream teaching, I looked at ed support teachers and went, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, true.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think you're probably stronger than you realize, and you could probably do any of those things and be fabulous at
Thank you. I think I
it.
just don't have the desire to go back to being in front of 20 odd children
Yeah, yeah,
or more by myself.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah. But
And so you mentioned that you identified that Harry had some challenges. Do you mind sharing when it was and what you identified in those challenges?
yeah, sure. So Harry, it basically started from 7 weeks. Uh,
Right,
7 weeks. So Harry never really slept. And then when he would sleep, so when I say he would never really slept, he would sleep in 45-minute blocks.
right.
And then he would wake up screaming and he would scream for hours. And I would
Oh,
have to then go to sleep. And then he
wow,
would wake back up anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. And we would do it again and again and again
wow.
and again. And so then when he was about 2,
Mm-hmm.
I when it was about 2, we decided we were going to have another baby. So if we were actually it was before that because they're 2.5 years difference.
Okay. Maybe
Anyway,
about 18 months. Anyway.
before he was 2, I took him to the doctor because I was like, this is not normal to be not sleeping like this. So something's going on. Can we please sort this out before we have another baby?
Yeah.
And actually, no, he was 10 months old when I took him to the first GP, and the GP said to me, he's a breastfed baby. He will be wakeful. That's just what happens. And I
Oh,
said, no, 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 no. It's not the waking, it's the screaming, because the screaming would go for hours. And I was like, it's the screaming. And they're like, oh, no, that's just welcome to motherhood. And I was like, no, no, thank you. And then I took him back, and then we went and saw an ENT because my GP said if you go and do a sleep study, they'll want an ENT report. So we went to an ENT, had his tonsils, had his adenoids out because his tonsils were massive. And
right.
then nothing really changed with his sleep.
Okay.
And then he went and had grommets put in. Again, nothing changed with his sleep. And then because he wasn't sleeping, his reactions to everything were over the top.
Big, yeah. Oh no. I've lost you.
Sleep study yet.
The reactions were really big.
They were really big and just not normal developmentally. They were just kind of next level, not just a 2-year-old not having a good time. So then when he was 3, so we ended up having another baby, and then that was George. And then when he was 3, he went for a sleep study,
Right.
which was this was kind of also all adding to that medical trauma that's coming because of all of the things that he had to go through, and he had to be brave, and he had to just deal with it. So we went for a sleep study, and that came out that he had central sleep apnea. So essentially, when he would fall asleep, his brain would forget to tell his lungs to breathe. And so he would wake up in a state because everything else goes into hyperdrive to wake you up to take a breath. So he was screaming because he was waking up with trauma
Yeah.
and with such an adrenaline burst, and then he wouldn't know why.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so yeah, so then that led us down the path of having to go see a neurologist as well, because it's not typical for you to have at his age central sleep apnea. So it generally comes from a tumor, a kink in the brainstem, something like that. So that then let us journey down that path, and MRI, all of that. They were like, nope, it's fine. There's nothing actually physically there. So that then led us to a naturopath and a chiropractor. So we're doing all of this. Meanwhile, Harry's still going to school. I'm getting phone calls from school at 9 o'clock in the morning to come and collect him because he's just not coping.
Mm,
So that then led us into our journey of school.
right.
And the pre-kindy journey was amazing. But then we moved to a school closer to home because of the lack of sleeping. So the travel time needed to be less for us.
Mm,
George was tiny, so needed to have less car travel as well. And we needed somewhere small that could have, it was a 1 to 2 almost staff ratio.
right.
So for Harry at that time, it was more about dealing with the catching the episode in the moment, not dealing with the aftermath.
Mm,
And when he was at the school that he was, I think it was 1 to 10,
mm-hmm.
they were really good at the aftermath stuff, but they weren't catching it as it was happening. So we moved with the idea of in this new school, they'll be able to catch it and they'll be able to kind of implement what we're doing at home. So
Yeah.
it's happening everywhere. So it's easier for him to connect the dots.
Yeah.
It's not what happened.
Oh,
So that was not a
no.
good move.
Oh, no.
Um, and so we ended up having a lot of meetings with them and a lot of behavior plan meetings with them, which then ended up with them not fulfilling their side of the bargain, their
Mm-hmm.
side of the plan, getting
Right.
phone calls when we'd established that phone calls were not to be made, like that kind of stuff. And so we ended up withdrawing him,
Okay.
moving him to another school.
Right. Far out.
Well, Harry's had a lot, the little
Yeah,
squidge. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and so in amongst all of that, we did do OT.
Okay.
We did do play therapy. So the play therapy was because he was going to have, oh, when he had the MRI as well, no, the sleep study, he had to have a blood test as well.
Mm.
And that caused a lot of problems for him.
Yeah.
Um, and so we then went down the path of play therapy to help him process the tonsils and adenoids, the grommets,
Mm.
the
Mm.
blood test, the MRI, the sleep study, because he
Mm.
was also going to have another sleep study in 5 years. Yeah, 5 years to see what's happening. So we did the play therapy,
Mm-hmm.
um, which was really good.
Great.
I really advocate play therapy.
Oh,
It's
that's,
really good.
yeah.
Um, yeah, don't
Yeah.
know where I was at.
No, that's fine. No, you were saying that you had started OT and play therapy. Um, what do you think, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced whilst you were doing therapy?
So for therapy for Harry, it was so play therapy he really enjoyed. So there was
Hmm.
no problems getting him to go to
Okay.
play therapy, and his play therapist Nina was really, really lovely. Um, we then also, what year was it? I think it was year 1. We started speech therapy as well because we were noticing that he wasn't retaining sounds and being able to transfer them into like sounding out and that kind of thing. So actually you helped me find Manda, which was really great. Manda's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went to school, I think maybe twice. And then Harry was not having a bar of her coming to school because he doesn't want to look different.
Right.
And so that started really. So we moved him term 4 of pre-primary, which was
Yes.
really lovely for him just to have a term of just learning the rules of school. And
Mm-hmm.
then year 1 really started
Mm-hmm.
school. Um, and so Manda went to school, I think, twice, and it was not okay. So then she started coming home to the house for him. And he was happy seeing Manda. And that progressed really nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got to actually, yeah, we got to a point where I think it would have been towards the end of year 2
Mm-hmm.
that he built such a great relationship with her that they got too familiar. And
Mm-hmm.
so then their relationship changed, and it became more of a where before he would like to please her and do what she asked and it was fun, it then got to a point where he was like, nah, mate, I'm not doing that. And so, yeah, Amanda and I sat down and had a big conversation about how it's time for a change,
Mm-hmm.
because it just wasn't like, he still loved seeing her, and that was great. And so then we stopped that, and then he started seeing a different lady this year who's actually one of my really good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he's known her since pre-kindy,
Right.
and she, even though he's really familiar with her, they've got a very different relationship. So she
Okay.
can get a lot out of him, and he's happy to go, and they do their. We go to her house.
Okay.
I pull him out of school to go to her house,
Okay.
and they have a great time. OT, he wasn't a fan of, but then I also wasn't a fan of, because what I was wanting for him from OT was the emotional regulation and the identifying of emotions and the strategies you would use when you can feel it coming on.
Mm.
They, and I did have many a meeting to be like, this is not what I'm after. And I feel like I just kind of got semi-railroaded with it. And so
Right.
then I just pulled him.
Okay.
And that's then when we did the equine therapy, because he loves horses, he loves riding, he loves all of that. So I
Mm.
thought we could do that, which we were doing. I think we did that for about a year. And then he just started saying that he didn't want to go anymore. And so then when the battle started happening about going to therapy and then having therapy, it kind of, I didn't feel like the battle was worth it.
Yeah.
Like the benefits he was getting was literally just counteracting the essential shit show that it was to get him there. So
Yeah.
it's like you're not actually dealing with the other stuff that you're meant to be dealing with. You're just dealing with this stuff right away.
Mm.
So
Did you feel like that had an impact on your and his relationship?
yes, 100%, because it made it, rather than being a fun time of us just spending time together going somewhere and
Mm.
just being us and being able to chat, which it is going to his current speechy. And when we would go to other things, we would just have us kind of time, and we would go for like a coffee beforehand, or we'd go for lunch, or we'd go for
Mm.
something. It
Mm.
then just became an argument. And so
Mm.
none of it was fun.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, there's this really short special time you get just to have one-on-one. If I'm
Mm.
arguing with you the whole time, or you're screaming at me the whole time, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like, it's just adding more angst and essentially trauma to something that you're trying to unpack.
Yeah.
And I was just like, no.
So what at some when you got to the nut point, like how did you come to that realization that enough's enough and we aren't going to push this any further?
The refusal of wanting to go started happening earlier in the week.
Right,
So
okay.
if he had like equine therapy on the Thursday afternoon, it would start on the Tuesday. I'm not going. I'm not
Okay.
going. And then every time I'd have a conversation, not even about that, but just talk to him, he would throw in, I'm not going. You can't take me. You can't make me. I was like, oh. So for him,
Right. It was
it was a bigger
consuming.
deal than just going.
Right.
So you also then need to get, I feel you need to get to a point where we're trying to teach our kids to have autonomy. We're trying to make sure that they have a voice. We're trying to respect what they want.
Mm.
Yes, the therapy is beneficial. Yes, it's doing great things for him. But if he's actually not in a space to accept that, then what am I doing? I'm
Absolutely.
forcing him to do something that is not kind of helping.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, we don't get any NDIS funding. So it's
Hmm.
a lot of money to be spending that's not
Hmm.
actually then working.
Yeah.
Not working, because it was working, but you just needed a break from it.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Were there moments in that whole process when in between speech and equine and play therapy, OT? I think maybe this might be more leading to your experience in OT. Did you ever doubt the process or feel overwhelmed with the whole thing?
100% overwhelmed. The
Mhm.
whole the whole navigating children with special needs or children with diverse needs is so overwhelming.
Mm,
I feel like I am extremely lucky in the sense that my sister is a psych and so
mhm,
is very brutal with me as well. So I would be like, oh, it's normal. And she's like, nah, it's not normal.
mhm.
That's not neurotypical, or that's not, you need to get that looked. So I've had somebody in my corner who knows the system, who
Yeah.
knows what's available, and has been very, she swaps her hats very easily. So she's my sister and she loves me, and she can be very like, she'll even say to me, do you want this? Do you want a professional answer, or do you want me to just back you up and be like, yay, let's do that? And I was like, oh. So
Oh, how
yeah. So
great to have someone like that in your corner.
I am so unbelievably lucky to have her. So like with George, quite recently, so both of my boys are diagnosed ADHD. And George was diagnosed ADHD, but because it wasn't impacting in a sense that was detrimental to his days, the PED was like, let's not medicate. And I said, okay, yep, that's fine. We can navigate that. We can do that with stuff we do at home, with movement. He's very, very movie all the
Mhm.
time. So we had fidgets, we had all sorts, like flexible seating, all of that kind of stuff. But then his outbursts at home were getting more and more intense. And I remember saying to my sister, but it's not as bad as Harry.
Mm,
And she said to me, she goes, all right, this is the professional hat. Harry's not a neurotypical baseline.
no.
So what you think is okay is not. I was like, oh,
Mm,
okay. And she goes, so think of it from that point of view. So George is having these big outbursts. George is he's crying out for help. And you're sitting there looking at him going, oh, but it's not as bad. She goes, but it is. He needs the
mm.
help. He needs more. And I'm like, right. Okay.
Okay.
So if left to my own devices, I would have just been like, oh no, we'll be right. We'll be right. But
Okay.
because I've got somebody there who's very happy to say to me, no, no, I
Yeah.
find that. But I think if I was on my own, it would be very overwhelming
Yeah.
because you get used to your norm
Mm,
and you get used to that day in, day out. Everything is a battle. Some days you think, oh, it's a good day. Yet if you were to have watched that through a video, you'll be like, oh,
yeah.
that was not a good day.
Yeah, I
So you
understand.
need that perspective of somebody else, I feel, who comes from a place of love, comes from a place of non-judgment, to just
Yeah.
be like, this is not this.
Yeah. And to be able to say to you, George is crying out for help.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I also feel how amazing is it for George and Harry to have their auntie in their
Oh,
corner as well.
yes.
Being able to open up that conversation for you. So, and like you say, in a non-judgmental way,
Yeah.
um, so that you can go, oh, yeah, okay. So with that in mind, what steps did you take for George at that time? Or are you still at the beginning of that? Because you said that wasn't that long ago.
So no, so I went and had a meeting with his teacher and
Hmm.
I said, what are you seeing? Because we are seeing these big meltdowns. We're seeing so one of the big things with George is he will have probably about 4 or 5 conversations going in his head at one time.
Right,
And then as he's talking to you, he gives you snippets of each one. And
right.
so when you're actually in a conversation with him, you've got no idea what's going on. And then when you ask a question to clarify, he would lose it at you because you're not listening. And it's like, whoa, oh, no. So I had a chat with his teacher and she said, yes, some of his friends are getting a little bit frustrated with him about it as well. And then I phoned the page just to say, what can we do with this? And he was like, no, we need to slow him down because that kind of ADHD trait is also going to impact him socially, where
Mm,
people won't want to talk with him. People
yeah,
won't want to engage with him. So it went from being the ADHD wasn't really impacting his life where we needed to do stuff for it. We do a lot of stuff anyway at home because of how we are.
yeah.
But this was starting to come through in other places. And George had also mentioned a couple of times that he's ADHD or hyperactive, so he's constantly on the move.
Mm,
Um, and he was saying that he was now having to squeeze his hands all day so that he could concentrate to what was being said.
Wow.
But sometimes he was just then he'd get entranced by moving his hands.
Right.
And so it was like, oh, buddy. So yeah, we spoke to the ped and he was like, let's try the medication, gave us a couple of options, and we've just kind of worked with that to see
Okay.
what helps. And it has helped.
Okay.
We did do so before we medicated him, we did do OT, but
Okay.
again, so this is coming from a parent and from a in a professional space. It's really hard to find a solid OT.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so the OT George was seeing in our initial meeting, I said, I'm not after fine motor. I'm after a sensory diet because this kid needs to move and I need him to be able to have a set sequence of doing whatever so then he can sit and be calm, not necessarily for hours. Let's go 15 minutes, like just to be present and still.
Mm.
And she said, yep, okay. And then we went through the process. And then she came out with her goals and they were all to do with handwriting.
Oh.
And I was like, this is not what I wanted. And then I asked her for a report and she gave me a generic letter and then tried to charge me $200 for it. And I was like, no. So I haven't had a great run with OTs.
Right.
At my work, there are a few who are amazing in that
Mm.
space,
Mm.
but there are some that you just kind of make you step back and go, what's happening?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah.
Mm. So I think that's really interesting. So you didn't continue with that OT. Have you tried to find another OT or have you just
No, I
not
haven't tried
yet?
to find another OT.
Mhm.
So also with my workplace, I implement a lot of OT strategies for like zones of regulation, for interoception, just all of that. It's kind of my day. That's what I do
Mm.
all day.
Yeah.
And so with the boys, we do a lot of that kind of stuff anyway at home. And so I feel like because I also have access to some amazing OTs who I have really great working relationships with, I can unpack stuff with them.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like I'm in a different kind of space where I'm lucky to have that in my workspace
Mm.
as well. Um, yeah, to be, I'm a bit gun shy with the OTs just because of the run we've had.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I can
yeah,
understand your hesitation with that. You've
yeah,
had, yeah, absolutely. Um, that would definitely have an impact on whether you'd be ready to, try another one or,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, you're about to say something?
Although that said, if the school were to say to me, look, we're having issues with this, and it falls under that OT bracket, and it's not something that I could have the time or patience to do, because that's another thing is,
Mm.
yes, at the moment I can do this stuff with the boys, but there will also come a time where they'll be like, nah,
Yeah,
not doing it with you. So
yeah.
I haven't completely shut that off as I'm not going to do that. I will then also, so if I'm told, look, we need to start looking at something, or if I start to notice something that I'm like, ooh, I don't know what to do with that, then again, from my work, I do have access to people who I
Mm.
can put them on wait lists if need be, and
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to hear, obviously I've got, a therapist hat on at the moment. But it's really interesting to hear how that kind of plays out in the mind of a parent when you're not getting what you asked for.
yeah.
How did you go with navigating your thoughts around that and then saying, no, I don't want to continue with this?
So with Harry's one, um, there were a few factors on it. So they were doing handwriting and stuff, which yes, he did need, but it wasn't kind of our main focus.
Mm.
It was in a group setting, which I wasn't super keen on. It
Mm.
was also a fair distance from our house, and it was like 4:30 or 5 o'clock at night. So there were quite a few factors of it was just it wasn't great timing, I suppose. Like the stars didn't align for it to work well.
Mm.
So with that, I just kind of said, look, it's not kind of what we're after at the moment, and the distance. So
Yeah.
that was how I kind of phrased that one. And then also Harry just didn't want to anymore. So again, that with him.
Yeah.
Um, with George's, I think I got really angry because I asked for a report to give to school with recommendations as to what we're doing, so what school could also help with. And I got a generic letter, and then
Mm.
I got a bill.
Mm.
And I called and I said, you can't charge me for a letter when I've asked for a report. And I think it was about $200. I was like, I'm not paying to see you and then getting this letter that says his main focus in this generic letter is handwriting, when that's not what we spoke about. And
Mm.
they were kind of like, oh, I'll get the practice manager to give you a call. And then I don't think it ever actually happened. And we just then didn't go back.
Wow.
So I think
Okay.
I just really cut ties. And I think for me, after having Harry and having to do all of the advocacy for him and building working relationships,
Mm.
because his primary school, where he went from like term 4 of pre-primary to the end of year 3, I worked my butt off to have a solid relationship with those teachers and their deputy principal,
Mm.
because we needed it. We needed the support from them. We needed to everybody be on the same page. And so by the time George came along and he was having therapy, they weren't on the same page. And I was like, I actually don't need you to validate what I'm doing. You're not doing what I need.
Mm.
Leah. And you're not
Yeah.
charging me money for something that I know what these reports should look like.
Yeah.
And that's not what it looks like. So no. So
So your experience, your life experience, your work experience, all of that played a massive part in being able to say no, but also how I feel like how disappointing that you did pay a whole lot of money for an assessment, and essentially you walked out of there with no more insight and less money in your bank,
yeah,
which is incredibly frustrating.
it is. It is really frustrating. And I think what's also really hard, so like the money part of it's really frustrating and annoying, but it's also the having to explain to the kids what's happening.
Yeah.
So I had to prep George with, we're going to OT, explain to him why he's going,
Mm.
because nobody else is going. So why am I doing this? And then having to afterwards be like, oh, we're not going anymore.
Yeah.
And to do that, but like, that's a lot on top of everything else that's happening as well. It's a lot of
Mm.
talking, so much talking.
So much talking and explaining.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
unpacking and allowing them to process it. So they'll ask the same questions 7 million times, but 4 weeks later, and you're like, we're still doing this. Okay,
Still
righty ho.
processing.
And just
Mm.
allowing the space for it and having the patience for it, which is really difficult.
Yeah.
The patience.
Yeah, especially when we're like you said, that tired, that level of tired when you're a parent is so different. So you're
Oh,
when you're busy with work and you're, potentially still not sleeping as well as we would like, and all of that impacts on
yeah,
your ability to have the patience that you would maybe want to have
yes,
endless supplies of.
yeah. Like I was looking back at photos the other day on my phone and videos, and I have all of these fun videos of the kids, like the stuff we're doing out in the back garden. And I was thinking, how, like, I'm tired now and I cannot be bothered. How was I doing that back then when nobody was sleeping? And then, because, yeah, Harry didn't really come out of his non sleeping until 5.5.
Mm.
So
Wow.
then when he was still non-sleeping, and then George had his typical baby sleep, they would tag team waking up.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I was functioning on nothing. And so I just think, how? How do you survive all that? It's like
Yeah, how
you
did you?
you
And
have
how
to.
did you, because side note, also remember that you had a Play-Doh business and
Yes.
as a little side note that you were doing as a
Yeah.
hustle. How did you fit all of that in? Aren't you amazing?
Oh
That's
God. It was just
incredible.
a lot of coffee. A lot of coffee. And a lot of just being like, oh,
Yeah. Oh,
but
amazing.
yeah,
Now, just to kind of shift it a little bit, I'm wondering with both Harry and George, but probably this is more for Harry, given all the amount of therapies he's had over the years.
yeah.
Have there been any small or big victories that stand out to you for Harry in his progress, and what does that mean to you?
Um, so current, the current lady he sees for, she's not a speechy. She does it's a multi-sensory literacy approach.
Mhm.
Um, and that's also my friend. But for him this year, so he's just finished year five, the confidence that she's given him.
Mm,
So he's gone from somebody who he also has dyslexia. So he's gone from somebody who when reading something or when asked to read something will just shut down like, no, I can't do it, I'm not doing it, you can't make me do it, don't you know I can't read, I can't do, and then it just spirals. Whereas now after seeing her for this year, he just has the confidence to tackle it, and you
right.
could see him just actually try. And then he, like, we just got his school report as well, so
Mm.
um again he moved schools for year four. Year four wasn't a great year for him. His teacher wasn't, she was a new grad and didn't really know how to deal with neurodiverse kiddies. And she
Mm.
had a few of them in her class. So it was a real, and Harry doesn't deal well with transition. So there was a whole other, it was a
Mm.
lot for him last year. And so then we made the decision with the head of support at his school to pull him out of everything so that he could just have, because last year he was getting pulled for MacLit. He was getting pulled for he didn't go to Italian because he was getting pulled to do other English stuff. So, and there was always people coming in to help him. So he was kind of highlighted as being for him different. So
Mm.
this year we made a decision to not have him on a curriculum IEP. He was on an environmental one, but not a curriculum one. And then he also wasn't getting pulled for anything.
Mm.
And that I think also added with my friend Tash, who was seeing, just kind of made him feel a bit more neurotypical, just like the other kids in the class. So his
Mm.
confidence and his willing to try and all of that has just really blossomed this year.
Yeah, sure.
So, and I think a lot of that comes from Tash.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's massive.
yeah,
That that confidence is that crucial
yeah,
part.
yeah. So now
Yeah.
we're starting to have the conversations with him because he's got dyslexia and the ADHD. They are allowed, he does have some like technology allowances. So
Hmm.
he's allowed to have a C pen reader and that kind of thing. And he has one, but he doesn't want to use it.
Doesn't want to
So
use that.
we have now started to have the conversations that will go over the summer, to be like your year six next year. Nobody can make you do anything, but you
Mm.
need to start advocating for yourself.
Yeah,
So you need to start when it is allowed to use whatever technology or support or whatever. Your answer is yes, because although your report was really good, you haven't really used any of your supports. So next year, you need to start using your supports and you need to start working out what actually works for you, because then year seven,
yeah,
high school is going to be a whole different game. So,
absolutely.
so he was like, yeah, I
So
could have done
so
better.
you kind of want to go with using year six as a bit of a trial and error year to work out what
Yeah,
he feels is useful or not useful,
yeah. So
rather than just let's just put our hands in the air and not use anything, and
yeah,
then year seven comes along and then we're on the back foot again.
yeah. Because I feel like for him as well, cognitively, we're at a different level now. So cognitively, he can actually, having this year, and this is the hard thing, everything takes so long. It's not
Mm.
like it's a 2 month turnaround for him and then, we do a strategy and it's done. This takes a long time. So we had year 4, which was just diabolical, but it is what it is. And then year 5, him being allowed to have that autonomy to just be one of the boys.
Mm.
But then when things popped up, he was still really argumentative and he was still really like, oh, I'm not having that, not having that. And then the conversations we've had towards the end of term 4 and now, I mean, he's finished school now, but these will keep on happening over the summer are, there are other boys in your class who have the same as you, who are ADHD and dyslexic, and they do get the same supports as you, but you wouldn't notice because they don't fight it.
Mm.
So this is
Mm.
the other thing of trying to get his head around the fact that he's not the only one who's different. He's the only one who advertises extremely loudly when supports are put in place
Right.
and then gets embarrassed. So
Right.
it's kind of trying to coach him around the fact of if you were just quiet and accepted it and did it, nobody would know.
Mm.
Nobody would be any of the wiser.
Mm.
Um, and he said the other day, he was like, yeah, I do like to cause a bit of a commotion, don't I? I'm like, yeah, you do. You do. And he's like, yeah, okay, rightio. So I think what we'll do is before school starts next year is kind of have some goals for him to trial and see what works for him and how he wants to go about this.
Yeah.
And then I'll have a meeting with his teacher within week 1 to be like, hey, this is what we're trying.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, if you could share one piece of advice or encouragement with other parents who are at the start of the journey, what would that be?
Oh, for home or for school?
Well, maybe for any of it, maybe with therapy. How about we go with you've had lots of experience with
I have lots of
therapy.
experience. I think with therapies, don't just because they are um therapy is a big umbrella. So like if you have a speech therapist, a speech therapy is a big umbrella. And then you
Mm.
have different areas underneath. Just because you find a speech therapist that can take you, that's amazing because the wait lists are huge. You found someone who can take you. However, what you need is sound recognition or whatever, but your speech therapist specializes in swallowing. That's not who you need to see. And
Mm.
just because that isn't what's happening doesn't mean speech therapy is not for you. It just means you need to find the right one. So if you're
Ah.
putting your name on a wait list, I personally would do so. If they came back to me and said George needs to see another OT, I would put his name on a few different lists, and
Mm.
I would go and see people as well because we haven't had great run with OT, but because we didn't have the right OTs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I haven't had a great run with them, but that's not necessary. That's not like the overarching OT's fault.
Mm.
That's we haven't found our fit.
Yeah.
And I think when you are dealing with children who or people who need more support, you have to fit. Because if you also, and this is a big one, like with education as well, if you don't have a relationship, you're going to get nothing.
Mm.
So you need to have a relationship. Then also don't give it 2 or 3 weeks. You need to build relationships.
Hmm.
So then that takes time. But I think it's a hard one. I think you've just got to be really upfront and blunt about what you want.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it is overwhelming and you're dealing with people. And again, this is not really, for me, I find it hard because I'm in that space.
Mm.
So I almost not know what to say, but I know what to expect.
Yeah.
Whereas people and parents who are not in this field or, so with Harry, when you're first going through it all, you're not, I know you're not wrong. Don't let people think that you're wrong or that you don't know what you're doing. They're your children, your children. You
Yeah.
know what they need. You are asking a professional for help. like you have to advocate hard, and you have to be really clear on what you want and
Mm,
what they need,
yeah.
which is hard when you're talking to a professional who that's their realm and you're like, oh, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. But you need to be, I don't know, you just need to advocate hard. You need to be there, be present. And you do know what you're doing. You
Yeah.
do know what you're doing. You live with these little things.
Yeah. That's
So
amazing. That's great advice. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And I know that there are going to be many people who listen to this episode and get a great deal of insight and support from it, just understanding and hearing you share your story and what you've gone through and the trials, the challenges, but also the successes along the way. So thank you for being so open and honest and for sharing that with us.
no worries. Thanks for having me.